Okay, so when you hear the name Isaac Newton, what comes to mind? Probably a guy sitting under a tree, an apple falling on his head, gravity, right? The Principia Mathematica. But what if I told you his final great obsession had nothing to do with physics and everything to do with solving the crimes of the ancient world?
Yeah, that Newton. He's a legend, the father of modern physics, the man who basically wrote the instruction manual for the universe with these beautiful, undeniable equations. His entire legacy is just built on this foundation of scientific certainty.
And this is where the story gets really wild. Because in the last years of his life, Newton wasn't really looking up at the stars anymore. He was looking back, way back in time. And he was completely convinced that the entire timeline of the ancient world was just fundamentally wrong. And, of course, that he was the only one smart enough to fix it. And look, this wasn't some little side hobby for him. This was a full-blown obsession. It took over the final years of his life and resulted in a book that honestly just shocked everybody.
So, a year after he died, the world is waiting on the edge of its seat for one last masterpiece from the great Newton. And what they got was a bombshell. The book was called The Chronology of Ancient Kingdoms Amended. And it wasn't about physics. It wasn't about math. It was a direct attack on the accepted history of the world as everyone knew it.
And his family? They knew what a big deal this was to him. His nephew-in-law introduced the book with that quote right there. I mean, the expectations were through the roof. People really thought he was about to do for history what he had already done for physics. Reveal its hidden universal laws.
So you gotta ask, why? Why would he even do this? Well, because when Isaac Newton looked at ancient history, he didn't see a grand, sweeping story. He saw a total mess. You have to understand, for a mind like Newton's, a mind that craved order, logic, universal laws, the state of ancient history was just an offense. He saw it as a contaminated crime scene. He looked at the timelines of Egypt, Greece, the Bible, and all he saw was this tangled disaster of contradictions. It was a puzzle he just had to solve.
So he basically went on the attack. He had this whole list of accusations against the historians who came before him. He said they were sloppy, that they'd write down the same king twice with different names. He accused them of just making up fake kings to plug holes in their timelines. And he said they ridiculously exaggerated how long these ancient kingdoms lasted. To him, the bottom line was simple. Their work was unscientific, and you just couldn't trust it.
So if history was a crime scene, then Newton was going to be the detective. He was sure that with the right tools, his tools, he could crack the case wide open. He wasn't going to treat history like a story. He was going to treat it like a massive data problem. Okay, so tool number one, it was his home turf, math. Specifically, he brought in statistical analysis. He figured he could find a reliable pattern in all the chaos of human history. And he zoomed in on one key question. How long does a king actually rule for? He crunched the numbers from kingdoms all across the centuries, from ancient Israel to modern France and England, and he found this amazingly consistent pattern. So forget all those epic myths about kings ruling for 50, 60 years. The hard data showed something totally different. The average reign was just 18 to 22 years. And this, right here, just lays it all out. The ancient texts are jam-packed with these kings who supposedly ruled for ages. But Newton's data, his statistical reality, suggested that was basically pure fantasy. And for him, that was Exhibit A that the old timelines had been artificially stretched. His next tool was just pure, cold logic. He called it the 80-year rule. And the idea is really simple. If a story is only passed down by word of mouth for more than 80 years, it's no longer reliable fact. It's become a myth. With that one sharp rule, he could just slice away huge chunks of what people at the time considered to be history. But his third tool, wow, this was his masterstroke. This is where he blended his encyclopedic knowledge of ancient texts with his unmatched genius for astronomy. He realized that the night sky was, essentially, a giant, perfectly reliable clock that he could use to date events with scientific precision. He focused his investigation on one specific legendary event from Greek mythology, the voyage of Jason and the Argonauts. He became convinced that hidden inside ancient descriptions of the constellations from that journey was the key, the one clue that could unlock the entire timeline. So how did he do it? It was pure genius.
First, he dug through all these ancient texts looking for descriptions of the night sky during the Argonaut's voyage. Then he applied this key astronomical principle called precession. See, the Earth has this tiny, slow, predictable wobble, kind of like a spinning top that's starting to slow down. Over thousands of years, that wobble makes it look like the stars are slowly drifting across the sky. So by calculating the rate of that drift, he could basically rewind the celestial clock and pinpoint the exact date the stars were in the position the ancient poets described.
And after all that, he gets a date. A single, precise date, 937 BC. Now, in his mind, this wasn't a guess or an estimate. This was a scientifically proven historical fact, and it was hundreds of years more recent than anyone at the time believed.
Now, that single date was so much more than just a small correction. It was an anchor. By fixing this one point in time with scientific certainty, Newton could literally pull the entire timeline of the ancient world forward, completely changing how we understood history. And just look at the fallout from this. He uses 937 BCE as his anchor, and suddenly the Trojan War snaps forward by 350 years. The founding of Rome jumps forward by more than 120 years. He was literally compressing history, squeezing out what he considered to be centuries of made-up phantom time.
So in his mind, he was basically taking a giant intellectual broom to history. He believed he was sweeping away all the fog and dust of myth and superstition to reveal a shorter, tighter, and much more scientifically sound version of the past. So, what's the verdict? Did the greatest scientific mind in history crack the case? Did he solve the great crimes of ancient history? Yeah, the short answer is no. Unlike his laws of motion, his historical work is not accepted today. Modern historians and archaeologists with way more data than he had have shown that some of his key assumptions were just flawed. The timeline he created, it's considered incorrect. But that absolutely does not mean it was worthless. Not at all. The real value here is the incredible window it gives us into Newton's mind. I mean, this quote really says it all. For Newton, there was no real difference between the laws that move the planets and the laws that move human history. He believed it was all part of one single, unified truth, and his life's mission was to figure it all out. And maybe that's the real takeaway here. This incredible project shows us what happens when a mind like Newton's, a once-in-a-millennium genius, takes on a problem that might just be impossible to solve. And in that glorious failure, we see both the breathtaking power of the human mind and maybe, just maybe, its ultimate limits.